Congratulations, Shannon Lucid, and welcome to the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. Our second inductee is Jerry Ross. Jerry Ross, a retired United States Air Force colonel, entered active duty with the Air Force in 1972 and became a payload officer flight controller at the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in 1979. Ross flew as a mission specialist for 6 of his record-holding 7 flights to space and logged 1,393 hours in space, including 58 hours and 18 minutes during 9 spacewalks. Ross spent a considerable amount of time between 1998 and 2002 working on the International Space Station. Endeavour launched the first ISS assembly mission, STS-88, in December 1998. It was a 12-day mission during which Ross completed 3 spacewalks and aided in connecting umbilical cords between the U.S. Unity module and the unmanned Russian Zarya module. 5 of Ross's 7 flights were flown on Space Shuttle Atlantis. In between his first launch into space in November of 1986 aboard STS-61B Atlantis and his last on April 8, 2002 with STS-110 Atlantis, he also flew STS-27 Atlantis, STS-37 Atlantis, STS-55 Columbia, and then back to Atlantis on 74. We get that right? Throughout his career, Ross received 15 NASA medals and was awarded the American Astronomical Society's Victor A. Prather Award for his numerous spacewalking achievements. From 2003 until his retirement from NASA in January 2012, Ross served as chief of the Vehicle Integration Test Office at Johnson Space Center. Spacewalker, My Journey in Space and Faith as NASA's record-setting frequent flyer is Ross's recently published autobiography. Let's take a look at some highlights from Jerry's career.
One, zero, and liftoff. Liftoff of the space shuttle, and it has cleared the tower.
Okay, Jeff, I propose that we go to nominal deploy from here. No big deal. Nice smooth ride. Great news.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis with the Russian docking module.
Contact capture.
Been a lot of long hours working hard to get us ready to go fly. Just really do appreciate it. We look forward to getting home and sharing all the experiences with them.
I'd just like to thank NASA, thank the country for the tremendous opportunities I've had to serve with them. Thank you, and it's great to be home.
Ladies and gentlemen, astronaut Jerry Ross. To present Jerry for introduction into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, please welcome Hall of Fame astronaut Charlie Precourt.
Thank you. Jerry, thank you for allowing me to be part of your really special day. And you know, Jerry asked me to take this part for him today, and then asked me to be very gentle. And then I got to thinking I could be gentle, but I know a whole bunch of other astronauts who are going to contribute to today's statements about Jerry. But first, I want to recognize some very, very important people here today with Jerry. His lovely wife, Karen, and his son, Scott, and daughter, Amy, and his sisters, Judy and Janet. And Karen's mom is here, and she just turned 90, Wilma. We're really thankful that you're here. Well, Jerry, of course, has got a number of firsts and a number of records, and he has set some really accomplished numbers that I'd like to share with you today. But first, as a Purdue graduate and an Air Force guy, I can identify with Jerry in many, many ways as I followed him into my career as an astronaut. Jerry had been at Edwards as a flight test engineer, graduate of the test pilot school out there, and a flight test engineer on the B-1 bomber when it went early into its test work and stability and control. And I followed Jerry here almost 10 years later. He was a member of the 80 class, and I came in 1990. And I had my first chance to witness Jerry when he was preparing for STS-37. And as I mentioned, there's some neat stories about Jerry that come from other folks. And there's going to be a theme to this. It's called EVA, spacewalking. But he has another passion for flying in space, and it's called ham radio. And his crew, Steve Nagel and Ken Cameron and Linda Godwin and Jay Apt, had all gotten their ham radio licenses so that they could speak with kids around the world from on orbit. And Jerry was reluctant. He was too busy with preparing for his spacewalk, and Ken Cameron kept putting this book in front of him on his desk saying, you got to get this license, here's what you got to study to learn ham radio license stuff. And Jerry kept pushing it away, and every time he'd come back to the office, the book would be back in the middle of the desk. And they eventually, at some point, Jerry fessed up and said, okay, if we slip a month, I'll go get my license. And sure enough, the flight slipped, so Jerry had to go do it. But it gets better because early in the days of getting your ham license, you had to do Morse code. And if you've ever done Morse code, it's really hard. Well, the crew didn't tell Jerry that they removed that requirement from the license. So Jerry went and worked really, really hard, got his license, and they didn't tell him for months, years. Jerry went out on STS-37, and they deployed the Gamma Ray Observatory, and he conducted spacewalk and became known as one of the greatest, most prolific, and most capable of our spacewalkers, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But there was a little interlude in that, and that's when I got to fly with Jerry on STS-55. And Jerry was downtrodden because he was going to be in the laboratory 24/7, 365 with no windows, let alone being able to go outside. So he kept asking these questions like, don't we need to do an experiment outside for science with me doing a spacewalk? Or we're going to send all this science down by the KU antenna via radio transmissions. Maybe we can break the antenna and I can go out and fix it. But it was not to be, so we heard nothing but EVA. Can I do an EVA throughout the training and preparation for the flight? So there was this really tremendous photograph that was taken on STS-37 of Jerry really close to the window at the aft cockpit in the flight deck. And Jerry's face is about filling the window as it was taken by those astronauts at the time, his crewmates that took the picture. It was a beautiful photo. And so we cut it out in the exact shape of the window, and we put it on the aft window of the flight deck, and it was covered for launch by a cover. So Jerry didn't know the photo was there. And when we got on orbit, it was time for us to prepare for orbit activities. And Jerry's job in post-insertion or on-orbit preparation was to go around and take all the window covers off. And we're all looking at Jerry wondering, what's he going to do when the window cover comes off? And sure enough, off comes the window cover, and he's looking right at himself in the face. And this whoop went out, and he did back flips right there on the middeck. So we took the photo out of the window and took it down to the lab as a constant reminder for 10 days while he was toiling in the laboratory to see himself in the window out through the space shuttle. But I hope I'm giving you a flavor for this man's passion, his pure raw skill, and his integrity and his ability to pass on the experience to others. Jerry was a tremendous mentor of mine, and the camaraderie that we developed went on for many, many years. I mentioned Jerry's setting numerous firsts as well as records. I think of Jerry with the numbers 7, 8, and 9. When I became the chief astronaut, Jerry had flown 6 missions, and there was this belief that no one would ever get past that 6 threshold. And we had many, many conversations about that. And Jerry had become a real mentor for many of the other younger astronauts as we were really ramping up to fly on space station and do a lot of EVAs. And he took that with a great passion and instilled a lot of experience in the junior astronauts at the time. But we got Jerry that opportunity to fly that 7th mission. But it was also a number 8 right behind it, because when we flew together on STS-55, we had a main engine cutoff on the launch pad. We call it MECO. Main engine cutoff happened a little bit early. So Jerry's had 7 space flights, but 8 main engine cutoffs, which is in itself yet another record. And then 9, of course, is his 9 spacewalks, where he did a tremendous job getting us all the way through numerous experiments on orbit, launching and deploying satellites, but also assembling today's marvelous space station. So as we look and think about what's going to happen in the future, we often get asked as astronauts to advise young kids. We all go to school presentations. We have chance to see younger kids who dream of having the same experience that we do, and they always ask, what kind of advice can you give us about our career? And when I hear that question, I always think of Jerry because of his passion, his endless work ethic to get things done and to always do things with the utmost of skill and deliberation and getting it done right. And so he is a model for all of us. He's been an inspiration to us for many, many years. So we're here today to celebrate Jerry's latest great achievement. And from all of us at the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, congratulations, Jerry, and welcome to the Astronaut Hall of Fame.
Wow. Thank you, Charlie. I knew I made the right decision when I asked you to introduce me instead of Hoot. It is an honor to be here today, and I'm especially delighted that the ceremony is being held here in the new Atlantis facility with my favorite space shuttle hanging over our heads. I really do think that the Visitor Center and KSC have done a marvelous job in the way they have put this tremendous vehicle on display. And I'd like us all to give them a round of applause. Thank you, Theron. And thank you all for coming today for a day of celebration and remembering. First of all, I'd want to thank my parents, Don and Phyllis Ross, who are no longer with us. And also my sisters, Judy and Janet, who are here today. Thank you to my wife, Karen, daughter, Amy, and son, Scott, for all of your support and love over the years that have allowed me to do and see things that I never hoped to be able to see in my life. They're all so incredible, and I still smile every day when I get up thinking about all the things that I've been able to do. To my granddaughters, Cassidy, Katie, and Emily, thank you for being so darn cute. And thank you also to the rest of my extended family who's here, and what includes what Charlie had already indicated, my mother-in-law, Wilma Pearson, who recently celebrated her 90th birthday. Is Bob Seek here? Bob. You know, Bob and his selection committee were responsible for the selection of Shannon and me to be inducted this year. And Bob, I just want to tell you that I've always liked you, I've always respected you, and now I really, really like you. Thank you. Being selected for the Astronaut Hall of Fame is indeed an honor, and I would like to thank my childhood heroes as well. That's the original 7 Mercury astronauts who established and nurtured this institution, as well as the Astronaut Hall of Fame. It is a real thrill for me to be inducted into the Hall with my personal heroes, and indeed heroes of Americans and peoples all around the world. It's also an honor for me to join all these characters behind me who I had the pleasure of working with and flying with for many years while I was in the astronaut office. Throughout my astronaut career and since, my speaking engagements have concentrated on school children and trying to get them to be excited about their futures, to consider what their God-given talents are, and to set goals based upon those talents, then to study hard, to work hard, and to not give up too easily in the pursuit of their goals. I am delighted now to have the opportunity to encourage our future leaders in space exploration through the ongoing efforts of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. When Dan Brandenstein called me back in January to congratulate me on my selection into the Astronaut Hall of Fame, the first thing I thought was, man, I really am getting old. Thanks, Dan. But when Dan told me that Shannon was the other member of this class, I was delighted that my sister was going to be inducted with me. That's right, you heard it correctly. Shannon is my sister. Well, at least sort of. You see, Shannon and I did a public appearance in China quite a few years ago now, and I took my mother along on that trip. And Shannon and my mother hit it off right away. They bonded, and it wasn't long before they were picking on me, just like my 2 sisters do. So Shannon became my other sister, and frankly, Shannon, I always thought 2 was enough. I remembered making scrapbooks about launching satellites into space before the first satellites were launched into space. I remembered when Sputnik 1 was launched, and I remembered when, in 1958, Explorer 1 was launched. It was that same year, in 1958, that I decided that I was going to go to Purdue University in my home state of Indiana, that I was going to become an engineer, and that I wanted to get involved in our country's space program. I remembered how excited everyone was when the original 7 Mercury astronauts were selected and when they started to fly in space. I remembered pestering my parents when we were on a vacation in Minnesota on July 21st, 1961, until they stopped at a roadside restaurant so that I could watch Gus Grissom fly his suborbital flight on Liberty Bell 7. I remembered my mother allowing me to play hooky from school to watch John Glenn fly 3 times around the Earth on Friendship 7. I remembered listening to the radio as Ed White performed the first U.S. spacewalk, and I had a smile on my face as I listened to every word he spoke while he was outside and expressed such a glee and exhilaration for what he was doing. My high school senior trip was to go to Florida, where I watched an Atlas Agena launch, which failed to make orbit, and so therefore I didn't have the pleasure of watching Gemini 9 with General Tom Stafford and his partner Gene Cernan launch into space. So I got to see a launch, but I also got to see a launch scrub. I remembered the shock of the Apollo 1 fire and the excitement of every Apollo mission. I especially loved the Christmas Eve reading from Genesis by the Apollo 8 crew and the triumphant launch, landing, and return of Apollo 11. I also remembered a candlelight wedding in a small country church in Indiana on a cold, windy evening in January, where I married my wife and my best friend. I remembered the births of our 2 children, Amy and Scott. I also remembered Karen telling me when I actually looked green after my first flight test out at test pilot school, where I flew on a KC-135 during a mission that was called Dynamic Demo. I don't know what I was thinking when I decided to go fly on a dynamic demo flight for my first mission. I remember the first time I applied for the astronaut program and was interviewed but not selected. And I remembered my elation the second time when I was. I remembered Brian O'Connor's wonderful dry sense of humor in 1985 when on STS-61B the crew was sitting in Atlantis' crew compartment and nearing the end of the planned 20-minute hold. Our commander, Brewster Shaw, was wiping the sweat off of his palms. Brian O'Connor, a rookie as well as all the rest of us on the flight deck except for Brewster, said, "I wish you hadn't done that." I was feeling pretty good until you did that. You know, first John Young got off of the Astrovan to go fly. Then George Abbey got off at the Launch Control Center. Then the closeout crew strapped us into the cockpit, closed the hatch, and left. I'm wondering if they were trying to tell us something. And we all giggled. I remember the picture I took of Brewster shortly after we got into orbit. I can frankly tell you that you will never see a better smile than the smile on someone's face who has just experienced and survived such a ride. On that flight, Woody Spring and I completed 2 spacewalks investigating construction techniques in space. And I remember Woody saying at the end of the second spacewalk, "Let's go build a space station." And in fact, 13 years later, I got to do that. I remembered getting worried and cinching my T-38 ejection seat straps tighter anytime one of the pilots would say, "Have you ever done this before?" Or even worse, "Watch this." I remembered my friends on the Challenger and Columbia crews and the other friends we lost as well. I remembered the rivalry between the STS-26 return to flight crew and our STS-27 classified mission, avoid all media coverage at all costs crew. On a Saturday night in Houston, they honored the STS-26 crew at a gala black tie event. They were lifted up from the orchestra pit through a dry ice cloud while Lee Greenwood sang "Proud to be an American." Of course, the 27 crew got this on the evening news. At the Monday morning astronaut office meeting, the 27 crew recreated the scene for everybody's entertainment. While I played the Lee Greenwood song on my son's boombox, Hoot and Guy Gardner and Bill Shepard, all dressed in their white tux shirts and black bow ties, slowly rose from their seats as Mike Mullane was hosing off a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher below their chairs. Everybody in attendance in the office meeting laughed. They all thought it was hilarious, except for the STS-26 crew. Right, Pinky? I remembered wearing rubber pig noses and Lone Ranger masks to the pre-flight press conference for our classified STS-27 mission. I also remember that the Pentagon didn't think it was very funny. I remember JAP saying, "It's all downhill from here," when the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory's solar arrays successfully deployed on STS-37. The rest of the crew told him to hush and to not jinx us. And sure enough, the next step was to release the antenna boom, and it didn't deploy. And you know what? Doggone it. Jay and I had to go out on an unplanned spacewalk where we were able to free the antenna, to lock it into position, and save the $630 million sister observatory to the Hubble Space Telescope, which went on to do some incredible science and cause the astrophysicists like A squared, Steve Hawley back here, to rethink all their theories about gamma ray and gamma ray sources throughout the universe. I also remember trying on that same flight to make the electrically powered Cedar cart roll up and down the track in the payload bay during a spacewalk. I cranked and cranked the generator's handles so hard, trying to get it to move, that the rest of the crew told me after the spacewalk that I had been shaking the entire space shuttle. But it worked a lot better once I remembered to release the manual parking brake. I remembered our pad abort that Charlie talked about on STS-55. I also remember taking the entire crew to see the movie Groundhog Day, where the guy gets up every morning to relive the same sequence, just before we traveled back down here to KSC for our next launch attempt. I remember floating into the Russian Mir station and actually getting to visit other people already orbiting the Earth in their spacecraft during our STS-74 mission. I remembered all the people and all the work we did to get the tools, the training facilities, the mock-ups, the testing, and the procedures in place that allowed us to successfully climb the mountain of EVAs that were required to assemble the International Space Station. I remembered connecting the first two elements of the International Space Station on STS-88 and performing 3 spacewalks to mate electrical connectors and outfit the exterior of those 2 modules, which form the cornerstone of the International Space Station. And I remembered being on the first team of astronauts to enter the station on orbit. I remembered my last flight when we added S0 element to the International Space Station. My spacewalking partner, Lee Morin, on STS-110 and I were the first pair of grandparents to do spacewalks together. We were affectionately called by the rest of the crew the Silver Team. Now, I have to tell you, they did have some other ideas, and we picked the Silver Team because it was the least abusive of all of them. It was incredible that in just 17 years, I had gone from being the junior rookie on a crew to being the senior member of the Silver Team. All these are great memories, but some of the ones that I always cherish the most are the memories of all the dedicated people, government and contractor, that I met and worked with all over the United States and all over the world. And I have to tell you, there's several of them here today, and it's great to see them. Thanks for coming out. And I look forward to the next time I get down here. Let's go have a brew. We shared the same love, dedication, and excitement about what we were collectively doing. It made each day new and never boring. I always looked forward to getting to work to see what was next on the agenda. I thank God for blessing me in so many ways, for giving my family and my friends, and for allowing me to serve our country in such exciting and unique ways. Thank you for coming and sharing this wonderful celebration and my walk down memory road. Thank you.
Congratulations, Jerry Ross, and welcome to the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. The 2014 inductees were selected by a committee of current Hall of Fame astronauts, former NASA officials, historians, and journalists, and Bob Seek, as we've heard. The process is administered by the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. To be eligible, an astronaut must have made his or her first flight at least 17 years before the induction year and must be retired at least 5 years from the NASA Astronaut Corps. 17 years, that worked out perfect for you, right? Candidates must be a U.S. citizen, NASA-trained, commander, pilot, or mission specialist, and must have orbited the Earth at least once and made significant contributions to the study of space. Charlie, you know, that same kid keeps going up and back up there. We're going to find his mother. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present to you the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame class of 2014, Shannon Lucid, Jerry Ross.